Welcome to this video presentation, Use of Open Market and Statement of Work. After this presentation, you should be able to recall what to consider when using the open market, summarize the need for and content of a statement of work, explain the logistical efficiency behind planning in relation to statement of work, recall the procedures when using open market. One definition of open market is: the term open market is used to refer to an economic situation close to free trade or market where buyers and sellers can operate without restrictions. The buyer wants to buy transport capacity as cheaply as possible. At the same time, the transport capacity provider wants to sell as expensive as possible. The buyer wants to create a competitive situation among the providers, so the buyer gets the best possible price. Therefore, it's important not to give some providers an advantage by leaking our transportation needs to them or informing some providers of the content of the offers from other providers. We will, in this presentation, go through step by step the process of using open market. Once a buyer has decided to provide transport capabilities through the open market, there are a number of factors to consider. All providers should receive the same information at the same time in order to create a good and correct competitive situation. Describe the transportation needs in the statement of work. We will return to the content of statement of work. To be sure to get bids from the right players or providers, the invitation to bid has to be sent out broadly, both through brokers and companies, but also directly to those providers we want or where we have a framework agreement. Make sure that the distribution of the invitation is according to national or international law. Received bids needs a technical evaluation or whether the offer corresponds with the requirements described in the statement of work. Once the decision is taken, all tenders must be informed if they have won or lost the bid. Competition is your tool in the market. If you only invite one bidder, the price is always right, but it might be more than the double of the market price. Airplanes and sea lift exist in a global market. Sometimes it pays off to make sure that you make use of this. Just asking one local provider might be expensive. Coordination prior to entering the market. Instead of two nations approaching the market alone, it is normal paying off to coordinate to one single request to the market. This makes use of the scale of economy principles, which will enable a provider to utilize assets that are larger and cost less per transported weight vis-à-vis the transportation distance. Statement of work. Be sure of what you want. You will get what you ask for, so be precise and clearly when you describe the needed transportation. When making a statement of work, it's therefore important that you have done your planning analysis properly, as it can subsequently be very difficult to adjust the plan when a contract has been signed based on the statement of work. Use legal advisors. This will avoid technical problems. A statement of work is a description of the service a supplier has to deliver from an operational perspective. A detailed description of what to transport, including dimensions, information on the dangerous cargo, and, if necessary, particularly sensitive material. In case of packs, the number and amount of accompanying baggage needs to be described. Where material and packs are to be transported from and to, and when the supplier's responsibility for the equipment and packs starts and ends. The equipment and packs can be transported at the earliest, and when it should be at the final destination at the latest. It may be necessary to differentiate this if statement of work covers both advance party and the main body, and which equipment is prioritized to arrive first if the equipment is not moved all at once. Lines of communication is the route that the equipment and packs should follow. This is indicated only if certain geographical areas are desired to be avoided. Are there any special safeguards that the supplier should be able to provide, such as guarding, special security areas, safety-approved personnel to carry out transportation, and communication on special classified funds? If there are any conditions under which transport is desired or special services required during the transport, these must be stated. Example, if material handling equipment and loading at the starting point and/or final destination is a responsibility for the supplier or the owner of the equipment. Special requirements for storage during transport in relation to weather, power supply, and, if necessary, accommodation for packs. Are asset tracking required in order to the equipment owners to closely follow the equipment? It should be noted here that some firms do not want tracking devices in their aircrafts. If there is an allied partner supporting the transportation, they also may not accept tracking assets. How and when a status report is required in the transport process. When we make our statement of work, we need to consider the levels of demands we make on the supplier and what parts of the assignments we can perform ourselves. We need to assess the logistical efficiency of the statement of work. The shorter time window we give the supplier, the more limited will the solution be and often more expensive. The more requirement we want the supplier to comply with, the more expensive it gets. The less flexibility we give the supplier, the more expensive it gets. The higher quality we demand, the more expensive it gets. On the other hand, we can consider doing a part of the transportation ourselves, as well as handling and administration, but we also need resources to do that. We have to find the balance between the resources available and the effect you request. The term tender usually refers to a process whereby governments invite bids for a project that must be submitted within a defined deadline. To make a tender, the statement of work must be supplemented with some legal requirements. Here you should use legal advisors and contract experts. This will avoid technical problems. How to communicate in preparation for the transport and during the transport in regard to means of communication, in which cases and requirements of the supplier's contact ability. How to measure the supplier's ability to deliver the agreed transport. Conditions on how the transport is to be settled. Insurance of the transported equipment or packs. How liability can be applied, deadlines and formats. What format the offer must be prepared in. And when the offer must be submitted at the latest to be considered for the assignment. Overall, the process surrounding a tender can be described as listed on this slide. The task must first be described, and then a thorough task analysis must be made based on available planning factors. Develop the statement of work and the tender as earlier described in the presentation. Release the tender, receive offers, and conduct technical evaluation of incoming offers. If there is no fully compliance between the requirements of the tender and the offers received, you can enter into negotiations with the supplier and either ask the supplier to make a new offer that complies with the requirements of the tender, or even cancel parts of the requirements in the tender. Once the final offer is received from the supplier and the final technical evaluation is made, the recommendation is made of which supplier that has delivered the winning bid. Then the authorized person decides which supplier has won the tender. Inform the winner. The non-selected suppliers should also be informed. A real contract must now be drawn up based on the winning bid and at the same time starting preparations for transport as a cooperation between the supplier and the equipment owner. A framework agreement is defined in time and typically with a geographical area and/or one or more modes of transportation. There may be one or more suppliers on the framework agreement, and there will usually be a number of basic quality requirements for the transport service that should be provided under the framework agreement. Some countries are subject to national legislations on how public procurement, including the military, should be conducted. It can be a very bureaucratic process which requires a lot of work each time you have a transport need. Therefore, instead, you can make a framework agreement where many of these issues have been solved once for all, and you may subsequently go directly to the supplier, or if you have more than one supplier on the framework agreement, make a mini offer where only these providers are invited to bid. The advantages of having a framework agreement is to save time and resources when a transport need arises. You may have agreed on a transparent procedure for the preparation and implementation of a transport, including the possibility to call off any transportation on short notice. You can involve the supplier already in the planning phase, as they have a great insight into terms of transportations in many parts of the world. For a supplier, it's also beneficial to have a long-term contract, while it makes them able to invest and create benefits for equipment owner. In order to make a framework agreement attractive to potential suppliers, it is usually necessary to make them exclusive. This means that during the period of the framework agreement, you cannot use other suppliers within. This means that you cannot switch suppliers if the current supplier is no longer competitive but still meets the requirements agreed in the framework agreement. We have in this presentation introduced you to the use of open market and statement of work. Key takeaway: use of open market and statement of work is essential to be able to transport equipment and packs over longer distance. Thank you for following this presentation.